Woman takes giant talking cat to shelter. Then it says one word that shocks everyone. Morning light filtered weakly through Portland's perpetual autumn clouds as Eleanor Reynolds pulled her aging Subaru into the crumbling parking lot of Meadowbrook Apartments. The complex had long surrendered to decay, peeling paint, sagging gutters, cracked walkways. But Eleanor wasn't here for the architecture. At 68, the retired English teacher came for the colony of strays that had claimed the bramble-choked ravine behind Building C as their territory. Eleanor's gnarled fingers, joints swollen with arthritis, unlashed her trunk with practiced ease. "Breakfast time," she murmured, the words disappearing into the damp air as she arranged stainless steel bowls on the pavement. Her husband Richard had called this her mission of mercy before cancer stole him 18 months prior. Now these thrice-weekly visits provided structure to her emptied life. The regulars emerged cautiously, a one-eared tabby, a sleek black tom, twin gray siblings. But Eleanor's faded hazel eyes searched for one particular cat, the magnificent creature who had first drawn her to this desolate corner 5 years ago. Nancy. Even among strays, Nancy commanded attention. Massive for a female cat, she carried at least 20 pounds on her frame, with long white fur that had once been glorious but now hung in yellowed, matted clumps. Her broad face housed startling blue eyes that seemed to evaluate the world with uncanny intelligence. "Where are you hiding today, old girl?" Eleanor whispered, scanning the property's edges. When Nancy finally appeared from behind the dumpster enclosure, Eleanor's breath caught. The cat's movements had become painfully labored, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Most alarming was her once musical meow, now transformed into a raspy, broken sound that seemed to scrape against the air. "Oh, Nancy," Eleanor sighed, lowering herself painfully to the concrete. "You're truly suffering, aren't you?" The white cat approached with uncharacteristic slowness. Eleanor noticed with mounting dread the patches of missing fur revealing angry red skin beneath. When Nancy attempted her usual greeting, a rumbling sound that had always seemed oddly articulated, she dissolved into a coughing fit that left her massive sides heaving. Eleanor blinked back tears. For years, she'd tried coaxing Nancy into a carrier, called overcrowded shelters, and pleaded with rescue organizations. But the waiting list stretched endlessly, and Nancy's feral caution made capture nearly impossible. Until today, something fundamental had changed. Nancy's condition had deteriorated beyond the point where street survival seemed possible. "I can't watch you suffer anymore," Eleanor whispered, stroking Nancy's head. To her astonishment, instead of maintaining her usual distance, Nancy leaned into the touch. "Today's the day we get you help, old friend." Dr. Isabel Chin's Willamette Valley Veterinary Clinic specialized in feral cat treatment, but even her experienced eyes widened at Nancy's condition. Blood tests confirmed feline immunodeficiency virus, FIV. X-rays revealed a mouth devastated by infection, broken teeth, inflamed gums, abscesses that explained her difficulty eating and strange vocalizations. A severe respiratory infection had settled deep in her lungs. "She's critically ill, Eleanor," Dr. Chin explained gently. "The FIV has compromised her immune system, allowing these infections to take hold. She's also older than I initially thought, at least 9 or 10. Eleanor's hands trembled as she studied the films. "Can you help her?" "We can treat her, but she'll need extensive care, multiple dental extractions, long-term antibiotics, supportive therapy for the FIV. And she absolutely cannot return to outdoor living afterward. Her immune system simply won't allow it." "I'll take her," Eleanor said immediately. Dr. Chin shook her head. "With your existing rescue cats and Nancy's FIV status, it's complicated. FIV can be transmitted through bite wounds, and introducing a feral cat to your established household. Then what are our options?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "I won't put her back on the street to die. There's Whispering Pines Animal Sanctuary in Bend. They specialize in cases like Nancy's, older feral cats with medical issues. They have separate facilities for FIV-positive cats and staff experienced in socializing even the most traumatized animals." "Bend is 3 hours away," Eleanor protested weakly. "I know it's not ideal, but they have resources we simply don't have here. We could stabilize Nancy, perform the most urgent dental work, and then their transport van could collect her next week." Eleanor gazed at the sedated cat, remembering the fierce, independent creature she'd first encountered years ago, regal despite her harsh circumstances. "Will they let me know how she's doing?" "Of course. And you can visit, too." Eleanor nodded, tears tracking silently down her weathered cheeks. "Then let's do what's best for her." For 2 weeks, Nancy underwent treatment at Dr. Chin's clinic. Emergency dental surgery removed 7 badly infected teeth. Antibiotics battled the respiratory infection. Proper nutrition began rebuilding her depleted body. But her recovery was complicated by her untamed nature. She hissed and struck out at the staff, refused medication without sedation, and produced such unnerving vocalizations that the overnight technicians nicknamed her the Banshee. Only with Eleanor did Nancy show glimpses of tolerance. During the brief periods when the older woman sat beside her enclosure, reading aloud from well-worn classics, a habit from her teaching days that seemed to soothe the massive white cat. "Her voice sounds different today," Eleanor remarked to Marcos, the lead technician, pausing her recitation of Jane Eyre. "Less painful, somehow." Marcos nodded. "Dr. Chen says the dental work is helping. The inflammation is reducing, so her vocal cords can function more normally." Eleanor leaned closer to the cage. "Hello there, beautiful girl. Feeling better today?" Nancy fixed her with those penetrating blue eyes, opened her mouth, and produced a sound that sent electricity through both humans. Lulu. It wasn't quite a meow. It wasn't entirely a growl. It hung suspended between them, uncannily familiar yet impossible to categorize. "Did that sound like Marcos began?" "Hello." Eleanor finished, eyes widening. Yes, it did." They exchanged nervous laughs, the kind that acknowledges reality has momentarily slipped its moorings. "Cats can mimic sounds sometimes," Marcos offered, though he continued eyeing Nancy with newfound fascination. "Their vocalizations can be surprisingly complex." "Of course," Eleanor agreed quickly. "Just a coincidence." But later that afternoon, when Dr. Chen checked Nancy's recovery, the cat repeated the performance, this time with startling clarity. "Hello." Dr. Chen's clipboard clattered to the floor. "What on earth?" "She's been doing that since this morning," Marcos explained. "We think it's just an unusual vocalization that happens to sound like." "Hello," Nancy repeated, staring directly at Dr. Chen. "Like that," Marcos finished weakly. Dr. Chen recovered her clinical composure quickly. "Fascinating. Her improved dental health must be allowing for more articulated vocalizations. It's pareidolia, our brains finding familiar patterns and random sounds." The explanation was perfectly rational but didn't quite dispel the uncanny atmosphere that had settled over the room. When Dr. Chen later contacted Whispering Pines about Nancy's transfer, she found herself struggling to describe the cat's unusual vocalization without sounding fanciful. To her surprise, the sanctuary's British director, Martin Abernathy, didn't dismiss the observation. "Actually, we've had cases like this before. Cats with unusual vocal abilities that approximate human speech. We'll observe her carefully when she arrives." On transfer day, Eleanor brought a small care package, a blanket carrying her scent, toys Nancy had never shown interest in but might someday enjoy, and a handwritten letter detailing the cat's habits and preferences. When she said her goodbyes, Nancy pressed her forehead against the carrier grate, the first real gesture of affection she'd ever offered. "Hello," the cat rasped. Eleanor smiled through tears. "Hello to you too, sweet girl. I'm going to miss you terribly." Taylor Matthews stood awkwardly in Whispering Pines Animal Sanctuary's enrichment room, unsure why the sanctuary director had summoned her. At 34, the former graphic designer had been volunteering for 8 months, ever since losing her beloved Maine Coon, Fitzgerald, and her job in the same brutal week had plunged her into depression. Animal therapy had been her counselor's suggestion. "You wanted to see me, Martin?" she asked, tucking chestnut hair behind her ear. Martin Abernathy, the sanctuary's distinguished British director, knelt beside an enclosure housing an enormous white cat. Taylor, there's someone I'd like you to meet." "This is Nancy," he explained. "Recently arrived from Portland. FIV positive, recovering from significant dental disease and respiratory infection. She's made excellent medical progress but remains quite wary of people." Taylor observed the cat with interest. Despite her medical challenges, Nancy carried herself with a dignity that painfully reminded Taylor of Fitzgerald. "She's beautiful," Taylor said softly. "But why specifically did you want me to meet her?" Martin's eyes crinkled. "Because I think you two might have something in common. Nancy has a rather unusual characteristic that might resonate with you." Before Taylor could question further, Martin addressed the cat. "Nancy, say hello to Taylor." Taylor suppressed an eye roll, assuming this was one of Martin's well-intentioned eccentricities. But then Nancy fixed her with those piercing blue eyes and opened her mouth. "Hello." The sound hung between them, raspy but unmistakably word-like. Taylor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible." And yet, Martin replied mildly, "She does it consistently." Our behaviorist thinks it's a combination of factors: her vocal anatomy, the dental work that changed her mouth structure, perhaps some mimicry from her years among humans. Whatever the cause, the effect is rather remarkable. Taylor stared transfixed at Nancy, who returned her gaze with equal intensity. Something about those intelligent eyes, that commanding presence, the uncanny vocalization, it triggered a flood of memories. Fitzgerald on his window perch, observing the world with the same regal detachment. The talking cat in her grandmother's favorite storybook. The nights after Fitzgerald's passing, when Taylor imagined hearing his distinctive meow in her empty apartment. "Why me?" she finally asked, barely audible. "Because you once mentioned that Fitzgerald made sounds reminiscent of speech. Because you understand forming a bond with a cat others might find unusual. And because Nancy needs someone who won't be unsettled by her quirks, but might actually appreciate them." Taylor approached the enclosure slowly, kneeling at a respectful distance. "Hello, Nancy," she said softly. The cat tilted her head, regarding Taylor with measured interest before responding with her signature vocalization, "Hello." A startled laugh escaped Taylor's lips, part disbelief, part wonder. "Well, you're certainly something special." "Indeed she is," Martin agreed. "And she needs a foster home while she continues recovering. Someone patient, experienced with special needs cats, familiar with FIV-positive felines, and comfortable with her unusual communication style." Taylor's head snapped up. "You want me to foster her?" "Martin, I'm not sure I'm ready." "After Fitzgerald." "I know you've been grieving," he said gently. "But I've watched you these past months, Taylor. The way you connect with our most traumatized residents, your patience, your empathy. Nancy needs those qualities. And perhaps, forgive an old man's presumption, perhaps you need Nancy too." The decision to foster Nancy wasn't made lightly. Taylor spent days visiting the white cat, assessing their compatibility. While Nancy remained aloof during these sessions, there were hints of potential connection, a slow blink directed at Taylor, a subtle shift that brought Nancy minimally closer when Taylor spoke, and always, that uncanny vocalization. "Hello. Hello to you too," Taylor would respond, as if they were carrying on a conversation. One afternoon, Taylor arrived to find Nancy pawing frustratedly at a feather toy wedged beneath her bed. "Need some help?" Taylor asked without thinking. Nancy turned, fixed her with those piercing eyes. "Hello." "Yes, hello," Taylor smiled. "Let me help with that." Entering the enclosure for the first time, a step she'd hesitated to take, Taylor slowly retrieved the toy, offering it to Nancy at a respectful distance. Nancy stared at the feather, then at Taylor, then produced a completely different sound, a soft trill that somehow conveyed gratitude. "You're welcome," Taylor whispered, feeling the bittersweet ache of connecting with an animal after profound loss. That evening, she called Martin and agreed to foster Nancy. 3 months into fostering, Taylor's modest bin apartment had transformed. Baby gates created safe zones. Plush beds occupied strategic locations. A water fountain encouraged hydration essential for Nancy's kidney health. Shelves formed elevated pathways allowing the massive cat to survey her domain from secure heights. And everywhere, evidence of slowly blooming trust, white hairs on dark clothing, toys batted beneath furniture, the depression in Taylor's bed where Nancy now slept while Taylor was at work. Always departing before her return but leaving unmistakable evidence of her presence. They had established rituals honoring Nancy's boundaries while gently expanding her comfort zone. Mornings featured Taylor reading aloud, inspired by Eleanor's notes about what had calmed Nancy at the clinic. Initially, Nancy observed these sessions from distant perches. Gradually, imperceptibly, she positioned herself closer, from high shelf to lower shelf, from armchair to coffee table, and finally, miraculously, to the rug within arm's reach. Evenings centered around carefully choreographed meal preparations, Nancy receiving her specialized diet in one corner while Taylor prepared her own dinner. They ate in companionable silence, separated by a distance that diminished fractionally each week. And always, there was Nancy's signature greeting, the raspy hello that startled visitors but had become the soundtrack of Taylor's healing. "Hello to you too, Miss Nancy," Taylor would respond, the exchange becoming a touchstone of their developing relationship. One stormy night, as rain lashed the windows and wind howled through the eaves, Taylor curled on the sofa with her laptop. Nancy occupied the opposite end, closer than she'd ever voluntarily positioned herself. The storm intensified. A violent gust rattled the windows, and Nancy's ears flattened against her head, her massive body tensing. "Just a storm," Taylor reassured softly, not making direct eye contact. "We're safe inside." Thunder crashed directly overhead. Nancy made a small sound of distress, not her usual vocalization, but something vulnerable, frightened. Then, to Taylor's astonishment, the massive white cat stood, took 3 deliberate steps across the couch, and settled against Taylor's side, trembling slightly. Taylor froze, scarcely breathing. In 3 months, Nancy had never initiated physical contact. Moving with exquisite care, Taylor lowered her hand until it hovered just above Nancy's back. "Is this okay?" she whispered. Nancy looked up, those piercing blue eyes meeting Taylor's, then deliberately pressed upward into her palm. "Hello," she rasped, the familiar sound carrying a new note that Taylor couldn't name but felt resonating through her chest. "Hello, beautiful girl," Taylor whispered back, tears blurring her vision as she gently stroked Nancy's snow-white fur. "Hello." For months later, Taylor signed Nancy's adoption papers in Martin's office, making permanent what they'd all known from the beginning. "Eleanor will be thrilled," Martin remarked, watching Taylor's signature flow across the document. "She's followed Nancy's progress religiously." "I'd love to thank her personally," Taylor said. "Would that be appropriate?" "I think that would be wonderful," Martin smiled. The video call connected on a Sunday afternoon in late spring. Eleanor's elegant face appeared on screen, silver-streaked auburn hair framing kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Hello, Taylor," she said warmly. "What a joy to finally meet you, even virtually." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Taylor replied. "I've wanted to thank you for months for saving Nancy, for getting her the care she needed. She's changed my life." They exchanged stories, Eleanor sharing tales of Nancy's years as a street cat, Taylor reciprocating with accounts of Nancy's gradual integration into home life. "And the vocalization?" Eleanor asked. "Does she still hello?" The sound came from behind Taylor. She turned to find Nancy standing in the doorway, blue eyes fixed intently on the computer screen. "Nancy," Eleanor exclaimed, leaning forward. "Hello, beautiful girl. Do you remember me?" Nancy approached deliberately, jumping onto the desk with surprising grace for her size. She stared at Eleanor's image, head tilted in that characteristic way that had never fully disappeared. Then, with perfect clarity, she produced her signature greeting. "Hello." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely. "She remembers me." "I'm certain she does." Taylor felt her own eyes welling. "I think so too." What followed was a conversation unlike any other, 2 women connecting across distance, bound by their love for an extraordinary cat who participated in her own mysterious way. As they prepared to end the call, Eleanor wiped her eyes. "When I first found Nancy, I worried no one would ever see her value, that she'd be dismissed as just a problematic feral, too set in her ways, too medically compromised. I'm so grateful I was wrong." Taylor stroked Nancy's head, receiving a slow blink in return. "The most remarkable souls often come in unexpected packages," she said softly. "All they need is someone willing to hear what they're trying to say." Nancy looked directly into the camera and offered a final, resonant, "Hello." It wasn't merely a mimicked sound, Taylor reflected. It was communication in its purest form, a bridge between species, a declaration of presence, an acknowledgement of connection. "Hello. I am here. Hello. I see you. Hello. We are not alone." Nancy had journeyed from Portland's unforgiving streets to this sunlit apartment, from feral survivor to beloved companion, from illness to health, from isolation to connection. Her unlikely voice had opened doors, building bridges between strangers who became friends, between past and present, between loss and renewal. "Hello to you too, Nancy," Taylor whispered as she closed the laptop. "Hello, and thank you." Nancy blinked slowly, then curled in Taylor's lap, a space she now claimed without hesitation, her massive form a comforting weight, her presence a daily reminder that healing comes in unexpected forms, that connection transcends language, and that sometimes a single word contains all the meaning in the world.